G'day everyone, welcome back to the vlog. It's currently about 6:45 a.m. here in Melbourne. I woke up about an hour ago and I had some nice oats for breakfast, which was pretty nice. Now, I wasn't originally planning on doing a vlog today, but I had such a banger session yesterday with so many interesting hand histories. So I'm just like, let's get through some of these hands because they're really cool ones. It's just a perfect session for me to review. It was one day after my previous vlog where I had not the best session in the world, but this one was definitely a bounce back. So let's get into it. So I only played 2 sessions yesterday, but as you can see, they were pretty long ones because I did get in a total of 1,809 hands. So absolute marathon sessions there, but you can see I was running pretty well in the session because I was able to win a total of 1,053. It was definitely one of those situations where I was running hot, and we'll get more into this later, but I think I was playing well, so I'm like, let's just stick it out, get in as many hands as we can on a day where we are running so hot. And as you can see there, it did pay off to put in so much volume because we had an absolute mammoth win at the 50 cent $1 level. So we definitely did play a few interesting hands, which will pretty accurately display how I played across this session. So without any further ado, let's get into them. First hand, the action folds to a loose passive player on the button who goes ahead and open limps. Then I'm in the big blind with 10-9 offsuit. Probably just going to take a free flop with this hand, so I check it. And then pretty banger flop, we do flop top 2 pair on a 10-9-5 rainbow. The action's on me, and I actually decide to lead out here, looking to get a bit of value. I feel like passive players are probably going to be less inclined to stab at pots, so getting a check raise in here might be a bit difficult. I'd rather just build a pot by leading out. So I go ahead and bet the size of the pot, which you might as well do when the pot's this small. And then the opponent does call. So heads up to the turn still. It's a 7 of clubs, the action's on me. Still looking to bet out here. Want to get called by Queen Jacks, opening a straight draw. Any 10s, probably still going to call, particularly from a passive player. So I go ahead and lead out again. I go ahead and bet the size of the pot again, just because the pot is still pretty small, even though we did pot it on the flop. And then here's where things get interesting. The button actually decides to raise me. They go ahead and make it 33. Now the action's back on me, and I think in this spot you definitely want to go ahead and just call. Obviously folding's going to be off the table. They could be raising 7-5 for value. They probably, I feel like as a passive player on the button, they're probably going to limp a lot of hands. So even if they had like something like 7-10 offsuit, like I wouldn't be that surprised. So I go ahead and call here. The reason I'm not 3-betting for value is because we do lose to Jack 8, and I think a passive player is going to limp all the offsuit combinations of Jack 8 on the button, so there definitely is that concern that I'm behind here. So we go heads up to the river. The river's the ace of spades, doesn't improve us. I go ahead and check it over to the villain, and then they go ahead and bet the size of the pot themselves. So when the action's back on me here, I definitely am really concerned that I lose to Jack 8 offsuit, so I just go ahead and fold it here, getting such a bad price on the river. Not looking to pay off a villain who definitely has a lot of straights in their range, so pretty happy with that fold on the river there. So the action gets to a loose passive low jack. They go ahead and open limp. The action gets to a tight aggressive button. They go ahead and raise it up to 4. Then I'm in the big blind with jacks. Definitely going to go ahead and 3-bet here. I make it 16. And then things get interesting because the original limper, they actually decide to call the 3-bet. This happened in my last vlog where someone limp called one of my 3-bets, and I noticed there that that was a pretty strong range of hands. It definitely can be ace king or one of the stronger pocket pairs, probably not kings or aces, but definitely one of them. And the reason for this is I think they were going for a limp raise, but when there's a 3-bet pot, they sort of get a bit too timid to go ahead and 4-bet ace king or pocket queens or something, so they decide to just call instead. So definitely concerned about this range. Something even more concerning here though is when the action gets to the button, they go ahead and rip it all in for about 109 big blinds. So the action's back on me with jacks, and this is already a pretty gross spot. The button has pocket queens, pocket kings, pocket aces in their range. I do definitely think they have all of the ace kings in their range as well. So there is some merit to calling off here, but the reason I do decide to go ahead and fold here is because I'm actually concerned about the limper calling as well with a strong range of hands. They can have ace king as well. They can definitely have pocket queens, and even if they have a hand worse than jacks, they're probably going to fold. when I call. So it's like, I don't really think there's much value. I'm sort of just trying to win a pot against the button, who has very strong range themselves. So I ultimately do decide to go ahead and fold for that reason. We'll be super curious to hear what you guys think about that. Would you call off in this spot? Pretty awkward spot. Curious to hear your thoughts on it. And just for the record, the low jack folds as well. Next hand, I have ace king in the small blind, so when the +2 player goes ahead and opens it up to 2.5 and the cutoff cold calls, I'm going to go ahead and 3-bet here. I make a 14, then the original raiser folds, and then the player in the cutoff calls. So we go heads up to a flop, king queen 10 rainbow. The action's on me here, and I actually decide to go ahead and check in this spot. I do think there's potentially some value to betting. You can definitely get value from a hand that's, you know, a jack and a pair, because that's the open-ended straight draw, but I think this is probably a better spot to check to induce bluffs from the villain. This is a really good board for their range. They're going to have a few 2 pairs here, so they could go ahead and try and represent it. If they do have a hand like pocket sixes, they might just throw out a stab, which obviously is something we love when we have ace king. So I go ahead and check it over to them. They do go ahead and bet at it. They go ahead and bet the size of the pot, and I said the plan was to check call here, so definitely not going to get away from it yet, but considering the opponent did go ahead and bet the size of the pot, I'm definitely concerned. They could have flopped a straight, they could have 2 pair or a set, so I do call, however, and then we still heads up to the turn. Turn's a pretty good turn for us. It's the ace of hearts. I say it's a pretty good turn because we do make top 2 pair, but and we, you know, if our opponent has like queen 10 or king 10, we just sucked out on them. But at the same time, any jack is now a straight, and our opponent has jacks in their range, so I am somewhat concerned. I go ahead and check it over to the villain. Then they go ahead and bet the size of the pot again. This is an absolute sick spot. Hop in the comments, let me know what you would do here. I'm really not sure what the best play is, but in game at the time, I'm just like, a check call to induce a bet on the flop. Like, I can't fold once I get there, and I've sucked out on some of their 2 pairs, but I definitely do know villains who will only go ahead and bet a jack here. But in game, I do decide to call. We're still heads up to the river. The river's a 5 of hearts, pretty big brick. You can see here we only have 60 big blinds behind, so the plan is definitely going to be to check call. Not that I ever think the villain would be bluffing if they bet it on the river here, so I go ahead and check it over to them, and then they do check back, which is absolute music to our ears. No way they have a jack when they do that, and we don't actually get to see their hand because we just scoop the pot. So absolutely stoked that I didn't fold on the turn, but yeah, that might be a mistake in the long run. I'm really not sure. Let me know what you think. This next hand is probably my least favourite hand that I played during the session. So we get a limp from a passive under the gun player, then the +1 player goes ahead and opens to 2.5, so pretty small open sides there, but regardless of whatever size they use, when the action folds to us, we're always going to be 3-betting pocket queens. I go ahead and make it 8.5, then the original limper folds and the pre-flop raiser calls. So we heads up to a flop, 10-5-5 with 2 diamonds. The villain goes ahead and checks it over to us, and I want to go ahead and bet for value here. We can get called by any 10 or any flush draw, and I'm really not concerned about my opponent having that many 5s, maybe like ace-5 suited, but definitely going to go ahead and bet for value. I go ahead and make it 6.5, and then the villain calls. So we're still heads up to the turn, which is a jack of diamonds. It does complete the front door flush, but when the villain checks it over to us, I still want to go ahead and bet for value here. I think my opponent does have a lot of pocket pairs in their range, and if they do have pocket 8s, pocket 9s, pocket 4s even with a diamond, I definitely think they're going to go ahead and call a bet here. Plus it is possible their opponent to 2 pair with a jack and a 10. They're going to know that their jack and a 10 is going to be counterfeit against a stronger pair, so I don't want to go ahead and bet too big just because that might scare them off, but I definitely want to size it up to get called by those worst pairs with a flush draw. So I go ahead and make it 26, and then the villain calls. So we're still heads up to the river. The river's a 3 of diamonds. The villain checks over to me, and this is where I think I make the biggest mistake I make in the hand. I go ahead and bet for value here. I go ahead and bet half pot. I think betting for value here, there is some merit to just betting really small to try and get called by that like pocket 8s with a diamond. I think half pot's a bit too big though. I think sizing it to about like 30, maybe even like 25-ish, just small enough so the 8 of diamonds can call. When I go this big, I think the 9 of diamonds is probably going to fold, which makes this a very inefficient bet. And then the opponent goes ahead and raises me. I think once they go ahead and raise me, I have a pretty easy decision to fold here. My opponent can definitely have a full house with pocket tens or pocket jacks, and they can also easily just have the ace of diamonds. They could have, ace of diamonds, ten of clubs, or ace of diamonds, jack of clubs, just for example. So they definitely do have nut flushes in their range and a few full houses, so I think it's a pretty easy fold here once we do get raised. I really didn't need to lose that 42 on the river though. I really should just be checking the river back or betting really small for thin value. Lost more than I should have on this one, unfortunately. Next hand, we get a very large open from the +2 player to 3.5. And the action gets to a passive player in the small blind who calls. The action's on me in the big blind with a6 suited here. I do think you could do any three of the options. I think if you thought that the +2 player was raising very, very aggressively for large sizings, I would love going ahead and 3-betting here. I don't think that's the case in this instance. They have been playing tight aggressive, so I'm less inclined to take that option. I think folding probably just is the best option against a tighter range. Getting a worse price to call out of position, probably better off just folding. I do decide to call though. The large reason I did decide to call here is because I do have position on the passive player in the small blind, but I mean, even with that considered, you're probably just better off folding, getting a price, but it is what it is. Let's see a flop. Good decision calling pre-flop when we do flop this well, results-wise at least. So the small blind goes ahead and checks it over to us. We check our top two pair. The villain goes ahead and bets it. Small blind calls. Now, I'm definitely going to want to go ahead and check raise here. There are a lot of turn cards which are going to scare off an ace. I think the small blind has a lot of ace-x hands in their range. I think the original raiser has some like ace-king, ace-queen. They're a bit more of a savvy player, so they're going to know that's less likely we're bluffing with a passive player in the small blind, but even with that considered, we just want to go ahead and bet for value. I go ahead and make it 23, then the original raiser folds, and the small blind calls. So the small blind and I heads up to a turn. It's the ace of diamonds, pretty good turn for us. We do make the nuts on the turn. Small blind goes ahead and checks it over to me, and I'm definitely want to go ahead and bet for value here. I don't want to bet too large though, just because I don't want to price out a flush draw. If our opponent makes a flush on the river, particularly a passive player, they're probably going to be inclined to stack off. So I don't want to price out their flush draws, but I don't want to bet too small either, just because I think any ace is going to call a really big bet. So I go ahead and bet 25. Probably could size up a bit, maybe something like 35 would be a bit better, just get a bit more value when my opponent has an ace or a flush draw. I make it 25, and then the opponent does call. So we're still heads up to the river, which is the king of hearts. Small blind goes ahead and checks it over to me. The action's on me, and I think we have a pretty interesting sizing decision with what we want to do here. I think my opponent's range consists of a lot of flush draws, but I do think they have some stronger like ace-x type hands, and because of this, I actually think it's a spot to bet really big, just because even if I bet really small, like they're going to fold most of their flush draws. I guess I could have a king high flush draw, which might call a bet of like 30, but I think we can take that option out of the window just because our opponent, they're never going to raise with an X, but they're always going to call considering they're a passive opponent. So I think we just want to bet big here to get max value when our opponent has an ace. So I do decide to rip it all in as an overbet, praying that our opponent has like ace jack and is going to call off, and the action's on them and they fold. So unfortunately can't get paid off there, but I do love my line, and if I was running a bit better, I mean I ran amazing in this session, but if I was like Sunrun echelon, they would have had an ace there and paid off, but I think they were just calling down with a flush draw, so it's going to be pretty hard for us to get paid there. Next hand, the action's on me in the +1 position with pocket sevens. I do think there is merit to just folding pocket sevens here. I say this all the time, but you really do want to be raising hands in early position less often, just because playing out of position sucks. But I think as a standard move, you probably want to go ahead and open it, but it's probably the weakest pocket pair I'm going to open in early position. I go ahead and make it 3, and then we get a cold call from a tight aggressive player in the hijack, and we go heads up to a flop. Bang a flop for us. A7-3 with 2 diamonds. The action's on me. I want to go ahead and bet for value for sure here. I'm probably going to bet very often on ace-high boards when I raise early position, just because the opponent's going to know I have a lot of ace-king, ace-queen, ace-jack. So I go ahead and bet pretty small for that reason. If I'm going to be betting here often, I'm going to want to use a small size. So I go ahead and make it 2.5, and then the opponent calls. So we're still heads up to the turn, which is the 2 of hearts. Action's on me. definitely going to keep barreling for value, try and get max value from an ace or a flush draw. I go ahead and bet 10. I like that I used a large size here, but I think even if I went bigger, maybe the size of the pot, I think that will be a fine play too, just because I think my opponent's not going to fold a flush draw or an ace yet. Regardless, so I do bet pretty big, 10, and then they do call. So absolutely stoked with that. Heads up to the river, which is the 10 of diamonds. Not the best river in the world, but I still want to go ahead and bet for value here. My opponent definitely could have rivered ace 10, and we want to get value from that. And even though the river will be a bit of a scare card for their like ace jack and stuff, there's still a chance they might call. I go ahead and bet 19, which I think is a bit too big. I would have rather bet something like, just a little bit smaller, like 15, 16, just to give those ace hands a better price to call. I go ahead and bet 19, and then the villain goes ahead and raises it up to 44. So it's a pretty small raise, but I really don't think I can pay off here. My opponent's tight aggressive, so they're going to be weighed less towards bluffs. And I do think they have a bunch of flush draws in their range. King, Queen of diamonds, Queen, Jack of diamonds, 9, 8 of diamonds. So I do think they have a lot of flushes in their range, and I'm really not looking to pay them off. So I do go ahead and fold the pocket sevens there, and they scoop in that pot. So I think we'll run over one last hand before we wrap this thing up. The action folds to me in the hijack with pocket queens. I go ahead and open it up to 3. Then a loose aggressive player in the cutoff goes ahead and 3-bets it to 9. And then a loose passive player in the button decides to just cold call, as does another loose passive player in the small blind. So the action gets back to me here, and with so much money out there, I think this is a no-brainer decision to 4-bet with the hand as strong as pocket queens. If we do get any resistance in terms of 5-bets or calls, we are going to be a bit concerned, but our hand's too strong, and with so much money in the pot, we just want to go ahead and 4-bet it. I go ahead and make it 27. Then the original 3-better folds. The button actually decides to call again, and then the small blind folds. So I think when the button calls twice, they do have a lot of ace-king in their range. They do have a lot of pocket pairs as well, though. And, they are more of a loose passive player. So if they showed up with something like pocket twos, I wouldn't be too shocked here, just because they are getting a bit of a price to play in position. They're not getting the right odds to set mine, but I think that doesn't really matter to this player. I think they're going to call regardless. So that's my opinion on what their range is, which definitely influences my decisions going forward in this hand. So we go heads up to the flop. The flop is a 7-6-4 with 2 spades. The action's on me here, and I definitely do think there is merit to going ahead and c-betting for value, but I actually decide to check here, and the reason for this is I think a lot of the worse hands that will call a bet anyway are going to go ahead and bet themselves. If my opponent has a pocket 8 or stronger, they're going to go ahead and bet it for sure, and we just get a bit of extra value when our opponent does decide to bluff with a hand like ace-king. So I do think this is a good spot to check, and probably check raise to try and build a pot. So I check it over to them. Then we can't get the check raise in because the opponent checks back. So we still go heads up to the turn, turns it to a hearts. The action's on me here, and I definitely want to go ahead and bet for value now. I want to see if our opponent will float us with an ace high type hand here, and if they did check back and overpair, which I'm skeptical, but if they did, they're going to call a bet anyway. So I go ahead and bet 44, and then the opponent does call. So I definitely do think they have a few combinations of ace-king in their range, potentially some weaker pairs that they didn't bet off on the flop, but we are heads up to the river. River's a king of diamonds, pretty bad river for us. We do lose to ace-king now, so I'll just go ahead and check it over to the villain. Going to assess what they do. They go ahead and bet 25.5. I mean, if they did rip it all in, I would definitely consider folding here, just because I do think they have a lot of ace-king combinations in their range. But when they bet that small, I mean, I'm just getting such a good price to call. They potentially could just be sizing down with pocket 8s or something to try and eke out a bit of value from ace high. Regardless, never folding when they bet this small. I do throw in the call, so we get to see what villain has. 10-8 of diamonds. Not quite the hand I was expecting to see there. I guess they did flop a double gut shot actually, so it does make sense that they would call on the turn. When they bet so small on the river, we're never going to fold. Pretty happy to rake in this pot and not get bluffed off of it. So that's the most interesting hands I played across the course of this session. In terms of my gameplay grade from today, I'm going to do it. I'm giving myself an A. Absolutely stoked with my performance. I think I had a massive bounce back from the previous session I played where I gave myself a D+. Then I was so aggressive. I was just c-betting too much, just trying to win pots that I really shouldn't have been going after as hard. And I learnt my lesson today. I came back and I was more value oriented. You'll notice in those hand histories, I didn't really pull off any like big bluffs or anything like that. And I think it paid off for me. In these more passive games, you really do want to be more value oriented, just because opponents are likely to call a bit lighter as a general rule. I still want to look for good spots to bluff, but I think in today's session, I kept it clean, didn't get overly aggressive, and it absolutely paid off. Made some good folds as well. That definitely helps me have such a good result. So absolutely stoked with the session today, and that's why I'm going with the A. So that's going to wrap it up for today. Definitely had some interesting hands to go over, but we got through them pretty quick. I just wanted to get this thing out because it was such an interesting session. I didn't know when else I was going to have time. So let me know what you think. Hop in the comments below. Let me know what you think of my plays. Am I being too generous with the A grade? Hop in the comments below. Let me know your thoughts. Also, hit the thumbs up button. That really helps the channel's analytics. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. For now, I'm out of here. Peace.